Hey guys, tonight we begin with something profoundly ancient. The Great Pyramid of Giza, a monument so old that when the last pharaohs walked Egypt's sands, it was already more ancient to them than they are to us. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine standing at the edge of the Giza plateau as dawn breaks over the desert. The first rays of sunlight strike ancient limestone, turning the pyramid's surface from grey to gold. The air is still cool, carrying the faint scent of sand and stone. Around you, silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of weight, of time compressed into geometry, of human ambition crystallized into 2.5 million blocks of stone. This is the Great Pyramid. Not as tourists see it today, crowded and weathered, but as it was meant to be experienced, quietly, reverently, as a passage between worlds. Tonight we won't rush. We won't shout about mysteries or speculate about impossible technologies. Instead, we'll walk slowly through this monument, stone by stone, chamber by chamber, understanding not what seems impossible, but what actually happened here over 4,500 years ago. We'll explore the silence within its corridors, the darkness of its chambers, and the profound ambition that drove an entire civilization to build something meant to last forever. The Great Pyramid stands on the western edge of the Nile Valley, where green cultivation meets golden desert. This placement wasn't accidental. To ancient Egyptians, the west was the realm of the dead, where the sun god Ra descended each evening into the underworld. The pyramid rises from this symbolic boundary, a mountain built by human hands to bridge the gap between earth and sky, between mortality and eternity. From a distance, the pyramid appears smooth, almost natural, as if the desert itself lifted a perfect geometric form from its depths. But approach closer, and the illusion dissolves. What remains is raw, stepped, scarred by time and human interference. The outer casing stones, once brilliant white limestone polished to reflect sunlight like a mirror, were stripped away centuries ago, carried off to build medieval Cairo. What we see now is the pyramid's inner core, the skeletal structure never meant to be visible. Yet even in this diminished state, the scale overwhelms. The base covers 13 acres. Each side measures approximately 230 meters. The pyramid once stood 146 meters tall, taller than any human-made structure would stand for nearly 4,000 years. These aren't just numbers, they're declarations. This civilization wanted future generations to know they existed, that they achieved, that they understood something profound about order, geometry, and eternity. Walking toward the northern face, you notice how the desert floor seems to slope gently upward, as if the land itself bows toward this monument. The entrance, a dark rectangle cut into the stone about 17 meters above ground level, appears modest, almost humble. This isn't the grand doorway you might expect. It's a functional opening, designed not for processions or public ceremony, but for a single sacred purpose: to allow the pharaoh's sole passage to the afterlife. The original entrance was sealed after the burial, hidden beneath smooth casing stones, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. The entrance tourists use today, lower and to the side, was carved by looters in the 9th century. They tunnelled through solid limestone, following rumours of treasures within, creating a crude passage that eventually intersected with the pyramid's true corridors. Standing before this opening, you might feel a subtle shift in the air. The desert wind, hot and restless outside, seems to pause here. The darkness within doesn't invite, it waits. The ancient Egyptians didn't build this pyramid for visitors. They built it for eternity, for silence, for the journey of a single soul toward the stars. Let's step inside. The descent begins immediately. The corridor slopes downward at a precise angle, 26 degrees, cutting through the pyramid's core and into the bedrock beneath. The ceiling is low, forcing you to bend forward, hands touching cool stone walls for balance. The passage is narrow, barely a meter wide, and the darkness is absolute. Modern lights might illuminate the path today, but imagine this space as it was meant to be. Sealed, airless, silent as a tomb should be. The walls are smooth, cut with remarkable precision. Your fingers trace the limestone, feeling the subtle chisel marks left by workers 4,500 years ago. These weren't crude blows. Each strike was measured, controlled, part of a careful plan executed by skilled craftsmen who understood their work would last millennia. The air grows cooler as you descend. Outside, the desert bakes under a relentless sun. But here, deep within the pyramid's mass, temperature remains constant. The stone absorbs heat slowly, releases it slowly, creating an environment untouched by the rhythms of day and night. You're entering a space designed to exist outside time. The corridor continues downward for over 100 meters, passing first through the pyramid's built structure, then into the natural bedrock of the Giza plateau. The transition is subtle but noticeable. The built blocks give way to carved stone, walls showing the tool marks of workers who excavated this passage by hand, removing rubble basket by basket, carrying it up the narrow shaft and out into the desert sun. Every few meters the walls show variations in the stone. Some sections are smoother than others, suggesting different work crews or different stages of construction. The ancient Egyptians worked in teams, gangs as they called them, each with its own foreman and its own pride in craftsmanship. You can almost see them here in the flickering torchlight of 45 centuries ago. Copper chisels striking limestone, the ring of metal on stone echoing through passages that led nowhere yet. Passages being born from solid rock through sheer patient effort. The descent feels endless. Your legs begin to ache from the awkward bent posture. Your breath comes shorter in the close air. There's a psychological weight to moving deeper into the pyramid, leaving daylight further behind with each step, trusting ancient engineering to hold millions of tons of stone above your head. The Egyptians understood this psychology. The journey to the afterlife wasn't meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be transformative, each step a shedding of mortal life, each meter deeper a progression toward rebirth. At the bottom, the corridor levels out and opens into a chamber. The subterranean chamber. This space, carved entirely from bedrock, feels different from anything above. It's rough, unfinished, its floor uneven and its walls bearing the scars of abandoned work. The ceiling is low, pressing down with the weight of the pyramid above and the plateau below. In one corner, a shaft descends even deeper into darkness, leading nowhere, or perhaps leading towards something the builders abandoned. The subterranean chamber measures approximately 14 meters north to south and 8 meters east to west. The ceiling, flat and irregular, hovers barely 3 meters above the uneven floor. In some places, the bedrock shows the spiral patterns left by the copper drills the Egyptians used to bore test holes, checking the quality of stone as they carved downward. This chamber has puzzled archaeologists for generations. Its unfinished state suggests it was abandoned mid-construction. But why? One theory proposes that this was Khufu's original burial chamber, planned when the pyramid's design was still evolving. Perhaps the pharaoh or his architects decided this location was too low, too deep in the earth rather than soaring toward the heavens. Perhaps they wanted the burial chamber higher, closer to the stars the king would join after death. Another theory suggests the subterranean chamber served a purely symbolic purpose. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the underworld, the Duat, was a realm the dead had to traverse before achieving transformation. Perhaps this rough chamber represented that dangerous underworld, a place the pharaoh's soul would symbolically pass through on its journey upward toward divine rebirth. The chamber's acoustics are peculiar. Sound behaves strangely here, absorbed by rough stone, echoing unpredictably from uneven surfaces. Speak aloud and your voice seems to scatter into fragments, as if the space itself doesn't quite know what to do with human sound. The silence, when you stop speaking, rushes back with almost physical force. In the chamber's southeastern corner, that mysterious shaft plunges even deeper into bedrock. It descends for about 9 meters before ending abruptly. Was this meant to lead somewhere? Was it another abandoned plan? Or did it serve some purpose we can't reconstruct, perhaps holding offerings or ritual objects now lost to time? The shaft stands open like a question, unanswered after 45 centuries. Standing in the subterranean chamber, you become acutely aware of the pyramid's mass above you. Between this rough cavern and the open sky, like millions of tons of limestone blocks, thousands of years of history, and the weight of an entire civilization's hopes for eternity. The bedrock beneath your feet extends down through geological ages, stone laid down when this entire region lay beneath an ancient sea. You're standing at the intersection of human time and geological time, in a space carved by people who understood they were building something that would outlast not just their lives but their entire culture. The dampness in the chamber comes partly from the moisture that seeps through stone, condensing in this cool space far from the desert heat. In ancient times, before modern visitors and artificial lighting changed the environment, this chamber would have been absolutely black, absolutely silent, and absolutely still. No air moved here, no light penetrated. It existed in a state of perfect preservation, waiting for a purpose that perhaps was never fulfilled. Returning to the descending corridor requires climbing back up that long, narrow passage. The ascent feels different from the descent, your body leaning into the slope, muscles working against gravity in the awkward angle. The corridor seems narrower on the way up, the ceiling lower, the walls closer. It's easy to understand why ancient workers needed such discipline and trust to build these spaces, working in darkness with only oil lamps for light, creating precise angles through solid stone with tools we'd consider hopelessly primitive. About 28 metres from the pyramid's original entrance, partway up the descending corridor, a second passage branches off at a sharp upward angle. This is the ascending corridor, rising at the same 26-degree angle as the descending passage, but climbing instead through the pyramid's core toward chambers yet unseen. The entrance to this passage was once sealed with massive granite blocks, fitted so precisely that early explorers searching for the burial chamber walked past it repeatedly, unable to find the seam between plug and corridor. The story of how this seal was finally breached is worth pausing to consider. In the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun led an expedition to find the pyramid's entrance and the treasures he believed lay within. Unable to locate the sealed doorway hidden beneath the remaining casing stones, his workers simply started tunnelling. They chose a spot on the pyramid's northern face and began boring straight through solid limestone metre by metre, creating a crude horizontal passage into the heart of the monument. By pure chance, after boring for over 30 metres, Al-Mamun's tunnel passed close enough to the true descending corridor that the workers heard something collapse nearby. They adjusted their direction and broke through, discovering the ancient passage. More importantly, they found the lower end of the ascending corridor sealed by 3 enormous granite plugs that had been slid into place after the pharaoh's burial. These plugs, each several metres long and weighing many tons, were impossible to move or break. But the workers noticed something. The plugs were granite, harder than iron, but the surrounding pyramid blocks were limestone, relatively softer. So they tunnelled around the plugs, boring through limestone to bypass the impenetrable granite. That bypass tunnel, rough and irregular, is still used today as the main route into the pyramid's upper chambers. The ascending corridor itself, once you enter it beyond the granite plugs, is even narrower than the descending passage. The ceiling presses lower. The walls seem to lean inward. This was intentional. After the pharaoh's burial, workers slid those 3 enormous granite plugs down this corridor from above, sealing the upper chambers forever. Or so they thought. The plugs remain in place today, immovable, testament to the thoroughness of ancient Egyptian engineering. Climbing the ascending corridor requires patience and a certain determination. The angle is steep, the footing uncertain, and the enclosed space presses against instincts that prefer open sky and fresh air. Your hands brace against the walls, smooth limestone worn by thousands of years of touch. Your footsteps echo ahead and behind, creating a strange auditory sense of both progress and enclosure. The corridor rises for nearly 40 metres, climbing through the pyramid's internal structure. You're moving upward through approximately a third of the pyramid's height, passing through layers of limestone blocks that were quarried, transported, and placed with extraordinary precision. Each block in this section weighs tons. Each was fitted carefully into place by workers who understood that the entire structure depended on their accuracy. About halfway up the ascending corridor, a horizontal passage branches off to the south. This leads to the Queen's Chamber, a space we'll explore later. But continuing upward, pressing on toward the pyramid's heart, the corridor begins to feel interminable. The angle doesn't change, the walls don't widen. You simply climb, step after step, through stone that hasn't changed in 4.5 millennia. And then, suddenly, unexpectedly, the ceiling lifts away. You've entered the Grand Gallery. This space defies every expectation built by the narrow corridors below. The Grand Gallery soars upward, its corbelled ceiling rising 8.5 metres above the floor. The walls step inward in precise courses, each layer of stone blocks projecting slightly beyond the one below, creating a vaulted effect that seems to pull the eye toward heaven. The gallery is 46 metres long and continues at that same relentless 26-degree angle, a narrow cathedral of stone climbing toward the pyramid's heart. The Grand Gallery is unlike any other space in the pyramid, unlike any space in ancient Egyptian architecture. 7 courses of stone step inward on each side, creating the corbelled ceiling. Each course projects inward about 7.5 centimetres from the one below, the layers rising symmetrically until they nearly meet overhead. The gap at the top is covered by roof slabs, creating a tall, narrow space that feels both enclosed and expansive at the same time. Walking the Grand Gallery feels like walking through the spine of the pyramid itself. The floor, worn smooth by countless feet over centuries, slopes upward at the same relentless angle as the corridors below. The surface is polished limestone, some sections showing repairs or replacements made in ancient times, when the original stones cracked or failed. Along each side, benches cut into the limestone provide ledges at floor level, their purpose debated by scholars for generations. Some researchers believe these benches held wooden beams used during construction, perhaps supporting platforms or ramps that allowed workers to position the ceiling stones. Others suggest they supported some ceremonial feature now lost, wooden structures that played a role in burial rituals. Still others propose they're simply structural, helping distribute the enormous weight of stone above the Grand Gallery to prevent the ceiling from collapsing inward. But perhaps the most intriguing theory involves the granite plugs that sealed the ascending corridor. According to this interpretation, the granite blocks were stored in the Grand Gallery during the pyramid's construction, held in place by wooden beams resting in those floor benches. After the pharaoh's burial, workers removed the beams, allowing the granite plugs to slide down the ascending corridor, sealing the tomb forever. If this theory is correct, the Grand Gallery served as a massive stone magazine, storing the pyramid's own sealing mechanism until the moment it was needed. The walls of the Grand Gallery show the same remarkable precision as the corridors. The stones fit together with gaps measured in millimetres. No mortar holds them, only their own weight and the perfection of their cutting. Run your hand along the wall and you feel the subtle variations between blocks, the almost imperceptible ledges where one stone meets another. The surface is smooth but not polished, functional rather than decorative. Light, if you imagine the gallery without modern illumination, would have been carried as flickering flame. Torches held by priests during burial ceremonies, casting wild shadows against the towering walls. The smoke would have drifted upward, seeking escape through stone too perfect to offer any. In that wavering light, the geometry would have seemed alive, the walls breathing, the ceiling impossibly distant. The acoustics of the Grand Gallery are extraordinary. A whisper at one end carries clearly to the other. A voice raised in chant or prayer echoes and multiplies, becoming a chorus. The corbelled walls seem to channel and amplify sound, creating resonances that linger long after the original sound stops. Some researchers believe the space was designed intentionally as a resonance chamber, that sound itself played a role in whatever ceremonies occurred here. Others dismiss this as coincidence, insisting the gallery served purely structural purposes, distributing the pyramid's enormous weight away from the chambers above. But standing in this space, feeling how it transforms sound and sight and breath, purely structural feels insufficient. The ancient Egyptians didn't build anything this magnificent without intention. Every angle, every stone, every subtle detail served the pyramid's ultimate purpose, guiding the pharaoh's soul from death to divine rebirth. At regular intervals along the Grand Gallery's length, mysterious square holes pierce the walls at floor level. These holes, about 25 centimetres square, penetrate deep into the stone. Their purpose remains unknown. Perhaps they held wooden posts or beams. Perhaps they served some ritual function. Perhaps they were simply part of the construction process, holding temporary supports that were later removed. The holes stand open, empty, another puzzle among many. Climbing the Grand Gallery requires careful attention. The slope is steep enough that falling would mean sliding 46 metres down polished limestone, probably ending badly where the gallery meets the ascending corridor below. Modern handrails and non-slip surfaces make the climb manageable, but imagine attempting this in darkness, by torchlight, during a funeral procession. Priests carrying the pharaoh's sarcophagus would have struggled up this slope, the granite box weighing hundreds of kilograms, the footing uncertain, the angle treacherous. Actually, the sarcophagus itself presents a puzzle. The granite box now sitting in the king's chamber is too large to fit through the passages we've been travelling. It couldn't have been brought up the ascending corridor or through the spaces we'll encounter ahead. The only logical conclusion is that it was placed in the king's chamber during construction, before the chamber was sealed, before the pyramid rose to completion around it. The pharaoh's final resting place was built to contain his body, the stone vessel prepared and positioned before the monument was complete. As you climb higher in the Grand Gallery, the quality of the space seems to shift. The lower section feels massive, overwhelming, but as you rise, the narrowness of the gallery becomes more apparent. The walls, despite their height, stand only about 2 meters apart. You're climbing through a tall, narrow slot in the heart of the pyramid, a precisely engineered shaft that rises towards something crucial. The upper end of the Grand Gallery terminates at a great step, a platform of limestone that marks the transition from gallery to antechamber. This platform stands just over 1 meter high, requiring a substantial step up. The surface shows wear from centuries of climbing feet, the stone polished smooth by countless passages. Standing on this platform, you can look back down the length of the Grand Gallery, seeing the entire magnificent space stretching below, its corbelled walls converging toward the bottom, the space narrowing with perspective until it seems to close entirely. Beyond the platform, through a low doorway, lies the antechamber. Here, the space contracts dramatically. The Grand Gallery's soaring heights give way to a room barely 4 meters square, with a low ceiling that forces you to duck. The walls, for the first time since entering the ascending passage, are made not of limestone but of red granite brought from Aswan, over 800 kilometers away. The antechamber served as the pyramid's final defense. In the side walls, deep vertical grooves show where 3 massive portcullis barriers once stood, great slabs of granite that could be lowered to seal the king's chamber beyond. These weren't simple doors, they were massive stone gates designed to drop into place, their weight holding them closed against any attempt to open them from the outside. The mechanism for lowering these granite slabs must have been ingenious, though it's now lost. Likely, workers pulled wooden supports after the burial, allowing the granite to descend under its own weight. The grooves that guided the barriers remain clearly visible, carved deep into the walls, testament to the thoroughness of the security system. Only traces of the barriers themselves survive. The lowest slab may have descended into a slot cut in the floor, sealing completely. The upper barriers left gaps that determined looters eventually exploited, chiseling through the softer limestone around the granite rather than attempting to break the impenetrable stone itself. The antechamber's walls show something else unusual. On the southern wall, adjacent to the passageway leading to the king's chamber, a section of the granite facing was never completed. The surface remains rough, unpolished, showing the raw texture of the stone as it came from the quarry. This unfinished patch has sparked countless theories. Was it intentional, a deliberate imperfection in a monument otherwise obsessed with precision? Was it simply work left undone when the burial occurred? Did it serve some symbolic purpose, representing the incomplete nature of earthly existence? No one knows. The rough granite stands as another mystery, a question carved in stone. Beyond the antechamber, a final low passage, barely 1 meter high, forces one last moment of humility before entering the king's chamber. You must duck low, almost crawling, passing through a short corridor of polished granite. The passage is perhaps 3 meters long, no more, but crossing it feels significant. You're leaving the spaces of transition, the galleries and passages and chambers of preparation, and entering the ultimate destination, the reason for the entire pyramid's existence. And then you're through, standing upright again, and before you opens the king's chamber, this is the pyramid's heart. The reason for 2.5 million stones, for 20 years of labour, for the transformation of Egypt's resources and will into a single geometric form. The king's chamber is a rectangle, precisely proportioned, 10.47 metres east to west, 5.23 metres north to south, and 5.8 metres floor to ceiling. These proportions aren't arbitrary, they're carefully calculated, expressing mathematical relationships the ancient Egyptians considered sacred. The chamber's walls are constructed from enormous blocks of red granite, each weighing dozens of tons. The blocks were transported from Aswan, floated down the Nile on barges during the flood season, then dragged across desert and up into the pyramid through ramps and passages we can only reconstruct theoretically. The effort required to move even a single granite block from Aswan to its position in this chamber, 43 metres above the pyramid's base and deep within its core, staggers the imagination. Yet here stand exactly 100 of these massive blocks, fitted together with such precision that gaps between them barely exist. The granite gives the chamber a different character from the limestone corridors below. It's darker, the red stone absorbing light rather than reflecting it. It's heavier, the walls seeming to press inward, not threateningly, but with the weight of absolute finality. This is a space designed for endings and beginnings, for the moment when a pharaoh ceased being human and became divine. The floor is made of granite as well, 5 massive slabs fitted so precisely that the seams between them are barely visible. The ceiling consists of 9 huge granite beams, each weighing approximately 50 tons. These beams span the entire width of the chamber, supported at each end by the walls, holding up not just the ceiling but the entire weight of the pyramid above, except they don't hold up the weight alone. Above the king's chamber, invisible from within, lie the relieving chambers, 5 separate compartments stacked one above another, separated by massive granite beams. These chambers serve no religious purpose. They're purely structural, an engineering solution to an enormous problem: how to prevent the pyramid's weight from crushing the chamber below. The relieving chambers distribute stress, creating a kind of stone shock absorber that has protected the king's chamber for 45 centuries. The bottom 4 chambers have flat ceilings and are essentially large empty spaces. The topmost chamber, discovered by explorers who crawled through a narrow shaft in 1837, has a pointed roof, deflecting weight to either side like the pyramid's exterior profile. This hidden system, this invisible architecture designed to never be seen, demonstrates how thoroughly the builders understood their materials, their mathematics, and the forces they were channeling into stone. They didn't just stack blocks, they engineered a sophisticated system of load distribution that has allowed these granite beams to support millions of tons of stone for over 45 centuries without cracking or collapsing. In the king's chamber's western end sits the sarcophagus, a massive rectangular box of red granite, hollowed out to receive the pharaoh's mummified body, now empty, lidless, and bearing a crack along one side. The sarcophagus measures 2.27 metres long, 98 centimetres wide, and 105 centimetres high, including the base. The walls are approximately 15 centimetres thick, the interior carefully hollowed out to create a space just large enough for a coffin. The sarcophagus is too large to fit through the chamber's entrance. It was placed here during construction, the chamber built around it, the entire pyramid rising to protect this single stone vessel. This box was the entire purpose. Everything else, all the passages and galleries and chambers and millions of tons of stone, existed to shelter this one granite container and the divine body it would hold. Running your hand along the sarcophagus's edge, you feel the tool marks where ancient craftsmen shaped the granite. The surface isn't perfectly smooth. You can detect the subtle marks of copper saws, the traces of abrasive sand used to grind the interior hollow, the careful drilling that created the corners. This box represents hundreds of hours of skilled labour, workers painstakingly shaping one of the hardest stones known, creating a vessel worthy of a god king. The crack in the sarcophagus likely came from tomb robbers. One theory suggests they used fire and cold water to split the granite, heating the stone with flames, then shocking it with water to create fractures they could exploit. Another theory proposes they simply used metal wedges and brute force, hammering the stone until it cracked, However they did it, they violated the sarcophagus centuries ago, removing whatever treasures it contained, leaving only this empty, cracked box. But even empty, even damaged, the sarcophagus retains its power. It sits exactly where it was placed over 4,000 years ago, aligned precisely with the chamber's geometry. The ancient positioning was calculated with care, the box placed so that it would be centered, balanced, perfect in its spatial relationship to the chamber's walls and ceiling. Stand beside the sarcophagus and you can look into its hollow interior, seeing the base, the sides rising around you, the lip at the top where a lid once rested. The granite is cool to the touch, absorbing the chamber's constant temperature, holding it steady regardless of the season or heat outside. Place your hand flat against the interior wall, and you're touching stone shaped by people who believed this box would hold divinity, would cradle a soul transforming from human to god. The king's chamber's acoustics are remarkable. The granite walls and ceiling create a resonance unlike any other space in the pyramid. Speak aloud, and your voice seems to expand, filling the chamber with unexpected richness. Sing a note and the chamber amplifies it, adding harmonics, making a single voice sound like many. Some researchers believe the chamber was designed as a resonance chamber, that specific frequencies would have been produced during burial rituals. One experiment measured the chamber's resonance frequency at approximately 115 Hz, corresponding to an F sharp. Whether the ancient Egyptians knew this, whether they designed the space to resonate at this specific frequency, remains debated. But standing in the chamber, producing that note, you feel as much as hear the vibration. The granite walls seem to hum, the air itself vibrates. For a moment the chamber feels alive, responding to sound as if it were an instrument built from 200 tons of stone. The northern and southern walls of the king's chamber contain narrow shafts barely 20 centimetres square, angling upward through the pyramid's mass. These shafts weren't discovered until the 19th century. They were sealed at both ends when first found, not functioning as ventilation, serving some other purpose entirely. The southern shaft from the king's chamber, when traced backward along its angle, points toward the belt of Orion, the constellation ancient Egyptians associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. At the time of the pyramid's construction, around 2560 BCE, this shaft would have aligned precisely with the southern culmination of Orion's belt, the moment when those three stars reach their highest point in the southern sky. The northern shaft points toward the ancient pole stars, specifically Alpha Draconis, which served as the North Star during the Old Kingdom. These stars never set below the horizon from Egypt's latitude, circling eternally around the celestial pole. The ancient Egyptians called them the imperishable ones, stars that never died, perfect symbols of eternal life. These alignments weren't accidental. They were calculated, precise, intentional. The shafts served as symbolic passageways for the pharaoh's soul, allowing it to ascend to join the gods among the stars. The king's car, his spiritual essence, would rise through these shafts, travelling toward Orion in the south and the imperishable stars in the north, joining the eternal realm where gods dwelt. Some researchers argue the shafts served practical purposes as well, providing ventilation to workers during construction or to priests during burial rituals. But the shafts were sealed at both ends originally, suggesting ventilation wasn't their primary function. More likely, they remained sealed except perhaps during specific ceremonies, opened briefly to allow the king's soul symbolic passage, then sealed again for eternity. Modern exploration of these shafts has revealed additional mysteries. In 2002, a robot equipped with a camera crawled up the southern shaft, travelling over 60 metres until it reached a limestone slab blocking further progress. The slab has 2 copper pins embedded in it, their purpose unknown. A drill hole bored through the slab revealed a small chamber beyond, then another blocking stone. Where the shaft ultimately leads, whether it opens anywhere or simply ends deep within the pyramid's mass, remains unknown. These shafts, like so much of the pyramid, remind us that complete knowledge remains elusive. We can measure, analyse, explore with cameras and robots and laser scans. We can reconstruct methods and intentions with reasonable confidence, but the full meaning, the complete symbolic and religious significance of every feature slips just beyond our grasp. The ancient Egyptians built in multiple layers of meaning, physical, religious, astronomical, mathematical. We've decoded some layers, others remain hidden, waiting for insights we haven't yet achieved. The king's chamber ceiling, those 9 massive granite beams, deserves closer attention. Each beam weighs approximately 50 tons. Each was quarried at Aswan, shaped to precise dimensions, floated hundreds of kilometres down the Nile, dragged across desert, and lifted into position 43 metres above the ground. The engineering required to position these beams, to set them in place with the precision the chamber displays, represents one of ancient Egypt's greatest technical achievements. Consider the logistics. You can't simply crane these beams into place. No crane existed. No machinery could lift 50 tons. The beams must have been raised using ramps, probably internal ramps built up within the pyramid as it rose. Workers would drag each beam up these ramps, positioned within the pyramid's structure, until the beam reached the level of the king's chamber. Then came the delicate work of manoeuvring the beam into its final position. The workers had to slide each beam precisely into place, resting it on the chamber's walls, ensuring it aligned perfectly with the beams beside it. One mistake, one misalignment, and the entire ceiling would be compromised. Get it wrong, and the chamber might collapse under the pyramid's weight. They got it right. 9 times they got it right. 9 beams, each 50 tons, each positioned with precision that has held for over 4,000 years. The ceiling shows no cracks, no sagging, no evidence of stress or failure. It remains exactly as the builders left it, a testament to engineering skill that seems almost impossible given the tools available. The relieving chambers above add another layer of engineering genius. The first relieving chamber, called Davidson's chamber after its discoverer, sits just above the king's chamber ceiling. It's about 1.5 meters tall, extending the same length and width as the king's chamber below. The floor consists of those 9 granite beams that form the king's chamber ceiling. The roof consists of 9 more granite beams, equally massive, spanning the space above. Above Davidson's chamber lie 3 more similar chambers, each separated by granite beams, each serving to distribute weight and prevent crushing pressure from reaching the king's chamber. These chambers are cramped, difficult to access, filled with dust that has accumulated over millennia. The walls show graffiti left by work gangs who built the pyramid, paint marks indicating which team placed which stone, names like Friends of Khufu and Followers of the Strong Crown. This graffiti, crude and functional, provides some of the strongest evidence we have for the pyramid's construction date and purpose. The marks name Khufu specifically, placing the pyramid firmly in his reign during Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 2560 BCE. They're not decorative, they're the equivalent of construction site markings, workers' notations never meant to be seen by anyone but other workers. The topmost relieving chamber, named Campbell's chamber, has a peaked roof rather than a flat ceiling. The roof rises at an angle, forming a miniature version of the pyramid's exterior profile. This peaked design deflects weight to the sides rather than allowing it to press downward, distributing the enormous forces more efficiently. It's the final element in the stress distribution system, the last layer of protection, ensuring that millions of tons of stone won't crush the chambers below. These hidden chambers, this invisible architecture, reveals something profound about ancient Egyptian engineering. They didn't just build impressively, they built intelligently, solving problems through systematic analysis, mathematical calculation, and sophisticated understanding of materials and forces. The pyramid isn't simply big, it's brilliantly designed, every element serving purposes both visible and hidden, creating a structure that would endure not decades or centuries but millennia. Exiting the king's chamber, retracing steps through the low passage and the antechamber, returning to the great step at the top of the grand gallery, there's one more chamber to visit before completing our tour. Halfway down the grand gallery, where the ascending corridor continues below, a horizontal passage branches off toward the pyramid's centre. This passage is low, requiring you to bend double, and it extends for about 35 metres, through the pyramid's core, cutting horizontally through limestone blocks, before opening into the Queen's Chamber. The Queen's Chamber occupies a curious position in the pyramid's internal layout. It sits lower than the King's Chamber but higher than the entrance, positioned roughly at the pyramid's vertical centre line. The chamber measures approximately 5.5 metres east to west and 5 metres north to south, making it smaller than the king's chamber. The ceiling is peaked, forming a limestone gable that rises about 6 metres above the floor. The name Queen's Chamber is a misnomer, assigned by medieval Arab explorers who assumed any pyramid would contain both a king's and queen's burial place. The ancient Egyptians left no indication the chamber was intended for a queen. In fact, the chamber's purpose remains one of the pyramid's enduring mysteries, debated by scholars and archaeologists for generations. The chamber's walls are bare limestone, undecorated, showing the same precise stonework as the rest of the pyramid. The floor was originally covered with limestone slabs, but these were removed by early excavators, revealing a rough, unfinished surface beneath. The centre of the floor shows a depression where excavators dug down, searching for a burial shaft, finding nothing but solid rock. In the eastern wall, directly opposite the entrance, a niche cuts deep into the stone. This niche, about 5 metres tall and 2 metres wide, creates a recessed alcove in an otherwise flat wall. Its purpose remains unknown. Perhaps it held a statue of the pharaoh, a K statue meant to house his spirit. Perhaps it served some ritual function we can no longer understand. Perhaps it was structural, a corbelled vault that helped distribute weight. The niche stands empty, another question carved in stone. The Queen's Chamber has its own air shafts, similar to those in the King's Chamber but with crucial differences. These shafts angle upward through the pyramid's mass at slightly different angles than the King's Chamber shafts. But unlike those shafts, which once emerged on the pyramid's exterior surface, the Queen's Chamber shafts never reach the outside. They stop, blocked by what appear to be small doors made of limestone with copper handles. These mysterious doors became the subject of intensive investigation in the 1990s and early 2000s. Robots equipped with cameras explored the shafts, revealing the doors and attempting to determine what lay beyond. In 2002, a robot drilled through the southern shaft's door, revealing a small chamber beyond. Then another door blocking further progress. The northern shaft's door was explored similarly, with comparable results. Where these shafts ultimately lead, what lies beyond the successive doors, remains unknown. The shafts don't simply end, they continue, suggesting some purpose, some destination the builders intended. But 4,500 years after construction, we still don't fully understand what the purpose was. One theory proposes the Queen's Chamber was Khufu's original burial room, later abandoned when the design changed and the King's Chamber was added to the plans. This would explain why the Queen's Chamber shafts don't reach the exterior. They were never finished because the chamber was abandoned mid-construction. The change in plans might have occurred partway through the pyramid's construction, forcing builders to adapt to create the grand gallery and King's Chamber, while the pyramid continued rising around them. Another theory suggests the Queen's Chamber served a religious purpose, distinct from burial. Perhaps it housed statues or ritual objects necessary for the king's transformation. Perhaps it was a serdab, a sealed statue chamber where the pharaoh's car could reside, separate from his physical body in the king's chamber above. The niche in the eastern wall could have held such a statue, positioned to gaze eternally toward the passage leading to the ascending corridor and the upper chambers. Still another theory proposes the Queen's Chamber was never meant to be used at all, that it served as a decoy, a false burial chamber designed to mislead tomb robbers. The real burial would occur in the King's Chamber above, but thieves breaking into the pyramid might find the Queen's Chamber first, assume they'd discovered the burial, and leave without searching further. The theory falls apart somewhat given that determined looters eventually found every chamber in the pyramid, but perhaps the builders hoped the ruse would work. The Queen's Chamber's acoustics differ markedly from the King's Chamber's resonance. The peaked ceiling creates unusual effects, sounds seeming to rise and gather at the apex. Speak aloud, and your voice sounds different, altered by the geometry, transformed in ways that feel almost intentional. Some researchers have measured specific resonances in this chamber as well, frequencies that might have been used in rituals or ceremonies. The chamber's name, despite being historically inaccurate, has stuck in popular imagination. Most people visiting the pyramid still call this space the Queen's Chamber, unaware that no queen was ever meant to rest here, that the chamber's true purpose remains elusive centuries after its rediscovery. Standing in the Queen's Chamber, you feel the weight differently than in the King's Chamber. Here, The ceiling seems closer despite being higher, the peaked roof creating a sense of enclosure. The walls feel more intimate, as if the space were designed for something smaller scale than the King's Chamber's grand purpose. The limestone, warmer in tone than the King's Chamber's granite, creates a different atmosphere, less austere, somehow more human. There's a profound stillness here. Deeper than the King's Chamber's austere finality, the Queen's Chamber offers something gentler, a quietness that doesn't demand or judge. If the King's Chamber represents the Pharaoh's transformation into a god, perhaps the Queen's Chamber represents something more human. The moment before transformation, the pause between death and rebirth, the silence where the soul prepares itself for whatever comes next. In one corner of the chamber, modern explorers have left markers indicating where they dug, where they measured, where they searched for answers. These marks, though recent, already seem to age into the chamber's fabric. Centuries from now, they'll be historical artifacts themselves, evidence of our own civilization's curiosity about this ancient mystery. The passage leading from the Queen's Chamber back to the ascending corridor feels longer on the return journey. The low ceiling forces that bent posture again, and the 35-metre length seems to extend the longer you shuffle through it. Your back aches, your legs protest. But the discomfort feels appropriate somehow, a reminder that sacred spaces aren't meant to be easily accessible, that the journey matters as much as the destination. Emerging from the Queen's Chamber passage back into the ascending corridor, you have a choice. You can descend back toward the entrance, completing the circuit through the pyramid's known chambers, or you can pause here at this junction, this intersection of passages, and contemplate what lies beyond exploration. The Great Pyramid contains mysteries beyond the chamber's tourists visit. Over the centuries, various investigations have hinted at additional voids, unexplored spaces that might exist within the pyramid's mass. In 2017, scientists using muon imaging, a technique that detects cosmic ray particles passing through stone, announced the discovery of a large void above the Grand Gallery. This void, roughly 30 metres long, represents a space never accessed in modern times. What is this void? Another chamber, a structural feature, a gap left by construction methods we don't fully understand. The muon imaging can detect the void but can't reveal its purpose or contents. It simply shows that emptiness exists where solid stone was expected, that the pyramid still holds spaces we haven't entered, questions we haven't answered. Other investigations have suggested additional anomalies, small voids near the pyramid's edges, density variations that might indicate passages or chambers, thermal anomalies that could suggest hidden rooms. None have been definitively explored. The pyramid, even after centuries of investigation, retains its secrets. Perhaps some secrets should remain unprobed. Perhaps the mystery itself serves a purpose, reminding us that complete knowledge remains elusive, that some things transcend explanation. The ancient Egyptians built layers of meaning into every element: physical, symbolic, astronomical, mathematical, religious. We've decoded some layers, others resist our most sophisticated analysis. Descending the ascending corridor back toward the entrance, you retrace the path that brought you into the pyramid's heart. The corridor that seemed so oppressive on the way in now feels familiar, the darkness less absolute. Your eyes have adjusted, your breathing steadied, your mind settled into the pyramid's rhythm. But before emerging into daylight, there's one final element to consider, something that existed for millennia, but exists no longer. The pyramid's exterior once held something that transformed its entire appearance: the casing stones. Imagine the Great Pyramid as it appeared when newly completed, every surface covered in brilliant white Tura limestone, polished smooth as glass, gleaming under the Egyptian sun like a geometric star fallen to earth. These casing stones weren't decorative. They were the pyramid's true face, cut with such precision that the gaps between them measured mere millimetres. Each casing stone weighed several tons and was shaped to exact angles, creating sides so smooth they appeared as unbroken planes. The pyramid, when complete, would have appeared as a perfect geometric form, its angles calculated to within fractions of a degree. The sides would have shone, reflecting sunlight with such intensity that the pyramid would have been visible for miles across the delta, a beacon announcing Egypt's power and the pharaoh's divine status to anyone who looked. At the pyramid's apex, the pyramidion, a small pyramid-shaped capstone, was said to be covered in gold or electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. This golden peak would catch the first rays of dawn and the last light of sunset, symbolically connecting the pharaoh's tomb with Ra's daily journey across the sky. The pyramidion no longer exists, lost to antiquity, but descriptions suggest it was covered in inscriptions praising the king and invoking gods to protect his passage to the afterlife. The effect of the complete pyramid must have been overwhelming. Stand on the Giza plateau and imagine seeing not the stepped, weathered structure that exists today, but a smooth, gleaming geometric form rising from desert sand, its white limestone blazing in sunlight, its golden cap flashing like a star. The visual impact would have been stunning, unprecedented, a human-made mountain that seemed to bridge earth and heaven. The casing stones vanished gradually over centuries. The first losses probably occurred through natural weathering and the occasional earthquake that rattled the region. But the systematic removal began in the medieval period, when Cairo's rulers needed building materials for mosques, fortresses, and palaces. The fine white limestone of the pyramid's casing was perfect for construction, already cut to manageable sizes, easily transported from Giza to the growing city. By the 14th century, the removal was organised and thorough. Crews worked systematically, prying casing stones loose, loading them onto carts and hauling them to construction sites across Cairo. Many of Cairo's most beautiful medieval buildings contain stones that once formed the Great Pyramid's exterior. The pyramids, in a sense, were recycled, their polished surfaces dismantled and rebuilt into structures that still stand today. Only a few casing stones remain in place, visible near the pyramid's base where they escaped removal. These stones, weathered but still showing the incredible precision of their cutting and placement, offer a glimpse of what the entire pyramid once looked like. Run your hand along one of these surviving stones and you feel the smoothness, the careful angles, the attention to detail that characterized every aspect of the pyramid's construction. Without the casing stones, the pyramid appears diminished, but perhaps the loss reveals something important. Beneath the polished exterior was always this core, rough, stepped, solid, built to endure not through beauty but through sheer massive presence. The casing stones were the pharaoh's eternal face, but the core blocks were Egypt's eternal bones. They remain long after the beauty faded, testimony to engineering rather than aesthetics. Emerging from the pyramid's entrance into desert sunlight requires a moment of adjustment. The brightness overwhelms after the darkness within. The heat strikes like a physical force after the cool corridors. Sound returns. Wind moving across sand, voices from distant tourists, the rumble of modern Cairo on the horizon. You've spent perhaps an hour inside, but time feels uncertain. The pyramid exists outside normal temporal flow. Its chambers haven't changed in 45 centuries. They won't change in the next 45. Walking around the pyramid's base, you begin to truly grasp its scale. Each side stretches over 200 metres. To walk the pyramid's perimeter is to walk nearly a kilometre, all while staying close to walls that rise more than 100 metres overhead. And this is only one pyramid. Around it on the Giza plateau stand two others. Khafra's pyramid, nearly as large, retaining some original casing stones near its summit, and Menkaur's pyramid, smaller but no less precisely built. These three great pyramids don't stand alone. Surrounding them are smaller satellite pyramids, likely built for queens or royal daughters. To the east of each great pyramid stood a mortuary temple where daily rituals were performed to sustain the dead king's K. Causeways stretching hundreds of metres connected these mortuary temples to valley temples at the desert's edge, where the pharaoh's funeral procession would have arrived after crossing the Nile. Stone-lined pits beside the Great Pyramid once held full-sized boats, vessels to carry the pharaoh's soul across the celestial Nile. One of these boats was discovered intact in 1954, disassembled into 1,224 pieces and buried in a sealed pit. When reconstructed, the boat measured over 43 metres long, built entirely of cedar wood without a single metal fastener. It had been carefully taken apart and buried beside the pyramid to serve the king in the afterlife. The entire Giza complex was a machine for generating eternity. The pyramids weren't tombs in the modern sense, quiet places to store the dead. They were active centres of religious transformation, places where kingship transcended mortality, where human breath became divine wind, where the fragile flesh of a single man became the eternal stone of a god. And yet, for all their sacred purpose, the pyramids were also profoundly human achievements. They required organisation, mathematics, engineering, and the coordinated labour of thousands. They required dreamers who could imagine something that didn't exist, and pragmatists who could figure out how to make it real. Consider the logistics again, this time with the full pyramid in mind. The core blocks, each weighing 2 to 3 tons, numbered approximately 2.3 million. Quarried nearby, these blocks formed the pyramid's mass, stacked and fitted with care, if not the precision of the casing stones. Then came the fine white limestone for casing, quarried at Tura across the Nile, shaped to precise angles, transported by boat during flood season when the river rose high enough to carry heavy loads. The granite, used only for the king's chamber, the antechamber, and the relieving chambers, came from Aswan over 800 kilometres away. Each granite block weighed many tons, some as much as 70 or 80 tons. Floating these enormous stones down the Nile required boats strong enough to support such weight without capsizing. Landing them, dragging them from river to pyramid, raising them to their positions 43 metres above ground, all of this required engineering solutions we can only reconstruct theoretically. Consider the workforce again. Not slaves, but paid workers numbering in the tens of thousands. During flood season, when farming was impossible, farmers joined the construction effort, supplementing the permanent workforce of skilled craftsmen, stonecutters, surveyors, and engineers. These workers lived in purpose-built towns near the pyramid, housed in barracks, fed with bread and beer, provided with medical care when injured. Archaeological excavations have uncovered these workers' towns, revealing bakeries that produced hundreds of loaves daily, breweries that supplied beer in industrial quantities, and butcheries that processed cattle to feed the massive workforce. The workers weren't expendable labour, they were valued craftsmen whose skills made the entire project possible. Consider the precision yet again, seeing it now in context of the entire structure. The pyramid's base, covering 13 acres, is level to within centimetres across its entire span. The sides, each over 200 metres long, align to the cardinal directions with precision better than 1/10 of a degree. The internal passages maintain consistent angles through millions of tons of stone, never deviating from their calculated paths. This precision didn't happen accidentally. It required skilled surveyors using ropes knotted at precise intervals, plumb bobs to establish vertical water-filled trenches to establish level, and astronomical observations to determine true north. It required constant measurement, constant adjustment, constant verification that work was proceeding according to plan. Consider the time required. The traditional estimate of 20 years comes from calculations of how many blocks would need to be placed daily to complete the pyramid in that time span. If 2.3 million blocks were placed in 20 years, workers would need to position approximately 315 blocks per day, every day, for 2 decades. That's roughly 1 block every 2 minutes during a 10-hour workday. Is that possible? Barely. It requires exceptional organisation, multiple work crews operating simultaneously, careful planning of which blocks go where, and logistics that ensure blocks arrive at the right place at the right time. It requires that the work never stop, that the effort continues year-round for 2 full decades. It requires dedication that seems almost impossible to maintain, yet they maintained it. Block by block, layer by layer, year by year, the pyramid rose from desert sand, growing incrementally toward its final form. Workers who began the project as young men saw it through to completion as middle-aged veterans, their entire prime working years devoted to building their king's eternal home. When you understand what the pyramid truly represents, not mystery but achievement, not impossible but merely extraordinarily difficult, its power somehow increases rather than decreases. This isn't a gift from advanced civilizations or alien visitors. It's the product of human beings fundamentally like us, working with determination and intelligence, refusing to accept that something was impossible simply because it was hard. As afternoon light angles across the plateau, the pyramid's geometry reveals itself differently. Shadows cast by the stepped core blocks create patterns that shift minute by minute. The eastern face falls into shadow, while the western face blazes with reflected sunlight. The monument seems alive, changing, responding to the sun's movement across the sky. In winter, when the sun tracks lower across the southern horizon, these shadows behave differently than in summer's high sun. The ancient Egyptians may have used the pyramid itself as a massive sundial, tracking seasons by how light and shadow moved across its surface, using the monument for astronomical observations that helped maintain their calendar. The desert around the pyramid feels ancient in a way distinct from the monument's antiquity. The stone was quarried, shaped, placed by human hands, but the sand simply exists, shifted by wind, unmarked by intention. It accumulated around the pyramid's base over millennia, burying the lower courses until 19th century archaeologists cleared it away. Even today, crews continuously work to keep the sand from reclaiming what humans briefly exposed. In the distance, the Sphinx maintains its eternal watch. This massive statue, carved from a natural limestone outcrop, combines a lion's body with a human face, traditionally identified as Khafre, though some theories propose greater antiquity. The Sphinx's weathered features still turn toward the east, toward the rising sun, toward daily rebirth and renewal. The relationship between pyramids and Sphinx suggests how ancient Egyptians understood sacred space. These monuments don't exist in isolation. They form a complex, a landscape of meaning where each element reinforces the others. The pyramids draw the eye upward toward heaven. The Sphinx draws it forward toward the horizon. Together, they map the cosmos onto desert stone, creating a sacred geography that mirrors divine reality. As evening approaches, the quality of light changes profoundly. The harsh white glare of midday softens into amber, then deepens to rose, then shifts toward violet. The pyramid, so solid and permanent under noon sun, begins to shimmer at the edges, as if the geometry itself were dissolving into colour. Shadows lengthen, pooling at the pyramid's base, creeping across the plateau toward Cairo's distant towers. Temperature drops rapidly as desert nights always do, the heat stored in limestone beginning to radiate back into darkening sky. The wind picks up, moving across stone that has felt countless thousands of sunrises and sunsets, that has stood through the rise and fall of dynasties, empires, civilizations. The pyramid has seen more human history than any other structure on Earth, and still it stands, patient, enduring, waiting. This twilight hour is perhaps the best time to contemplate the pyramid's meaning. Not in the analytical light of day, when everything seems knowable, but in the liminal space between day and night, when certainty gives way to mystery, when the monument reveals not answers but deeper questions. Why did they build this? We know the mechanics. To house the pharaoh's body, to facilitate his transformation into a god, to provide a machine for generating eternity. But why did they believe this would work? What made them certain that the right architecture, the precise geometry, the proper alignment to stars would actually achieve apotheosis? What did the darkness of sealed chambers mean to them? What did they expect to happen when the pharaoh's car ascended through those star shafts? We can reconstruct their methods with considerable confidence. We can analyse their mathematics, admire their engineering, measure their precision. We can carbon date their materials and trace their astronomical alignments and excavate their workers' villages. But we cannot truly know what the pyramid meant to the people who built it, because we do not share their cosmology, their understanding of death, their beliefs about the relationship between stone and spirit. Perhaps that's why the pyramid endures so powerfully in human imagination. It stands at the boundary between knowledge and mystery, between what we can prove and what we can only wonder about. We know enough to understand it was built by humans using technology available in the 26th century BCE. We don't know enough to fully grasp what they thought they were creating. Night falls completely over Giza. Modern Cairo's lights create an orange glow on the horizon, illuminating the base of the sky. But here on the plateau, darkness deepens, and the pyramid becomes a black mass against black sky, defined only by absence, by the stars it blocks from view. Those same stars the ancient Egyptians watched, calculated with, aligned their sacred structures toward, still wheel overhead. Sirius, the star associated with Isis, rises in the eastern sky. Orion's belt, the celestial destination of Khufu's soul, according to pyramid texts, hangs in the south. The circumpolar stars circle the north celestial pole, never setting, eternal as the pharaohs hope to become. For a moment, looking up from beside this ancient monument, the pyramid's purpose becomes almost clear. Not to defy death, which even pharaohs couldn't escape, but to chart the course through it. Not to achieve immortality through magic, but to map the journey the soul must take. Not to live forever, which no physical thing can do, but to create something that would last long enough to guide future souls toward the same destination. The pyramid was both tomb and map, both protection and instruction. It sheltered the king's body while pointing his soul toward the stars. It announced his divine status to the living while preparing him for transformation among the dead. It was engineering and theology combined, mathematics in service of mysticism, human skill devoted to transcendent purpose. The cool night air carries sound differently than day's heat. Voices from distant guard posts echo across the plateau with crystalline clarity. Somewhere a dog barks, the sound travelling cleanly through still air. The wind moves across stone that has felt millions of such winds, that will feel millions more long after our own civilization becomes subject for future archaeologists. Standing here in darkness beside this geometric mountain, you understand something fundamental. The pyramid's greatest achievement isn't its size, its precision, or even its endurance, though all are remarkable. Its greatest achievement is its persistence of meaning. For 45 centuries, humans have looked at this structure and seen something that matters, something that speaks to deep concerns about life, death, permanence, and purpose. The specific meaning has changed. To the ancient Egyptians, it was a god-king's passage to the afterlife. To medieval Arabs, it was a repository of ancient wisdom and hidden treasure. To 18th century Europeans, it was evidence of a lost advanced civilization. To 19th century Romantics, it was a sublime monument to human aspiration. To us, it's many things simultaneously. Historical artifact, engineering marvel, astronomical instrument, religious symbol and enduring mystery. But through all these changing interpretations, the pyramid remains solid and real, providing an anchor for speculation, a physical presence that validates the human impulse to build meaning from stone. It says, we were here, we achieved this, we believed it mattered, we built to last. And because it lasts, because it endures visible and tangible, it validates that belief across millennia. This is what the ancient Egyptians understood that we're perhaps still learning. The only way to defeat time is not to fight it directly, but to work within its constraints, to build so solidly, so carefully, so precisely, that even as time erodes and damages and changes, the essential core endures. They didn't achieve immortality through magic or divine intervention. They achieved it through mathematics, through engineering, through the simple, stubborn refusal to build anything less than permanent. As you prepare to leave the plateau, to return to the modern world of electricity and engines and ephemeral things, you carry something intangible away with you. Not answers, really. The pyramid holds its deeper secrets too well for that. But perhaps a sense of scale, a reminder of what humans can accomplish when vision aligns with determination. 4,500 years ago, people looked at empty desert and imagined a mountain. They calculated angles that would align with stars not yet risen. They organised thousands of workers across decades of sustained effort. They shaped 2.5 million stones using tools we'd consider primitive, and they succeeded in creating something that would outlast their names, their kingdom, their language, their entire civilization. The Great Pyramid isn't a mystery in the sense of being unknowable or supernatural. It's a mystery in the sense of being profound, of holding meanings that deepen rather than simplify with understanding. We can comprehend how it was built. We may never fully comprehend why, in the deepest sense, why a culture devoted such extraordinary resources to ensuring one man's journey to the afterlife. But perhaps the why matters less than the that they attempted it, that they succeeded, that their monument stands, still speaking across the gulf of time, still asking us to consider what lasts, what matters, what's worth building. Walking back across the dark plateau, the pyramid recedes behind you, becoming silhouette, becoming memory, becoming the image you'll carry away from this place. In daylight tomorrow, should you return, everything will seem different. Crowds will gather, vendors will sell souvenirs, guides will recite practice speeches. The pyramid will seem smaller somehow, more familiar, stripped of the profound silence that filled its chambers tonight. But you'll remember this quiet tour, the descent into cool darkness, the weight of the king's chamber pressing down through granite and time, the soaring space of the grand gallery reaching upward towards something beyond sight, the emptiness of the sarcophagus that once held divinity, the mysterious shafts pointing toward Orion and the imperishable stars, the slow climb back toward light and the living world. You'll remember standing beside geometry and time, beside human ambition made eternal, beside a monument that asks nothing of you but wonder, that demands nothing but acknowledges everything about the human condition, our mortality, our aspirations, our desperate hope that something might last longer than our brief span of years. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built by Pharaoh Khufu during Egypt's 4th dynasty, constructed over approximately 20 years around 2560 BCE, containing 2.5 million limestone blocks weighing 6 million tons, standing 146 metres tall originally, aligned to the cardinal directions with precision measured in minutes of arc, housing chambers that haven't changed in 45 centuries, silent within, dark within, eternal. Not a mystery in the sense of alien visitation or lost technology, an achievement, an extraordinary human accomplishment, accomplished through intelligence, determination, and systematic organisation. Not impossible, just extraordinarily difficult, accomplished by people who refuse to let difficulty matter more than vision. The pyramid stands tonight as it has stood for millennia. It will stand long after we're gone, after our cities crumble, after our languages fade, after our civilization becomes subject for future scholars who will wonder what we believed, what we valued, what we thought worth building. It stands because stone endures when properly placed, because mathematics transcends the cultures that discover it, because precision, once achieved, persists across ages, because 4,500 years ago people looked at desert and death and said, "We will build something that lasts forever," and they did. The night sky above Giza holds the same stars ancient Egyptians watched from this very plateau, Sirius blazing in the east, Orion's belt marking the celestial realm of Osiris, the imperishable stars circling endlessly, never setting, never dying. The pyramid beneath them, dark and solid, continues its eternal watch, silent, patient, permanent. This is the Great Pyramid. This is achievement carved in the stone and raised towards stars. This is human ambition refusing to accept anything less than forever. This is not mystery in the sense of the unknowable. This is memory, preserved in limestone and granite, waiting for anyone willing to descend into darkness and silence, to understand what it means to build for eternity. The pyramid stands. It has always stood. It will stand long after tonight's stars have shifted in their courses across the millennia ahead. Silent, eternal, waiting for dawn to strike its stones once more, with a light that has travelled across space and time to illuminate geometry that has outlasted empires, and will outlast empires yet to come. Human achievement made stone, human hope made permanent, human belief that something can last forever, proven across 45 centuries of endurance. The pyramid stands.